So it seems there's the names of 2 new knight classes mentioned in recent publications, one of them named as a potential Siege Knight. Let's talk about some 40k nightly releases and teasers, and people's hopes for the range in the future. Hello and welcome back to Horseback Tactics, where today we're talking Imperial Knights. And with a few nightly books released recently between 40k and the Horus Heresy, I did find it kind of interesting that we actually have 2 more named classes that seem to be out there in the lore, but don't yet have miniatures on the tabletop. This is something that we've seen a few times with Games Workshop in the past, at least fairly often. Things that have shown up as named units in the lore have often got plastic models to follow up. It definitely doesn't happen literally every time, but at the same time it feels like it's something that Games Workshop often uses to set expectations. Perhaps the single best recent example of this being the Lord of Poxes for the Death Guard. He was a name that we first found out around about 8 years or so ago in the Death Guard Codex for 8th edition. One of 3 lords alongside the Lord of Contagion and Lord of Virulence. In 8th edition we only got the Lord of Contagion, the next edition we got the Lord of Virulence, and then in 10th edition we've got this Lord of Poxes. There's been a few others that are kind of like that. Maybe another good example that isn't out yet is a Berserker Surgeon for the World Eaters, who is mentioned as a unit for them in really quite a lot of lore pieces, as the one who maintains the 8-bound and the Butcher's Nails. Imperial and Chaos Knights haven't been around for the entirety of 40k's history, a bit over 10 years now with the first Imperial Knights kits coming out. Their designs and theming coming from the old epic scale game, but polished up to be an army of super heavy walkers for more current era Warhammer 40k. And for main classes of knight we have 5 different ones now: the small knight Armiger, a standard knight Questoris, also known as the Abhorrent for the Chaos Knights, a heavily armed gun turret knight Dominus, fielded as a Castellan Valiant or Tyrant, the tall Cerastus patterns, originally in Forge World resin and seeming to be aimed a bit more at the Horus Heresy these days, even if a few of them have been converted to plastic, and then the really big Achaeus Knights, with 2 patterns well capable of annihilating war machines or fortresses. For 10th edition Knights, it feels like Games Workshop wasn't really very ambitious with developing their range. I feel like it'd probably be far more exciting if they added in an extra class to the above list, rather than just variants within a class. For the new miniatures this time around though, it was basically just weapon upgrades for the Questoris or the Abhorrent Knight, with the Knight Defender or Knight Ruinator. From people talking about the Knight Codex online though, it seems that really quite a lot of people picked up that there was another knight class mentioned here. It seems to be talked about in the section pertaining to the Questoris class knights before it goes through the individual roles within that class. It compares the Questoris to the Dominus Knights, and then rarer knight patterns such as the Cerastus and Acastus, and interestingly enough a Trycholus class. Probably the most intriguing thing is that it's denoted as an entire class of knights, so it should be at least somewhat different to the ones that we saw on the page previously. It means it's not just a Questoris with different guns. It doesn't look like this one has ever been mentioned at any point before in Warhammer 40k, so it does seem to be a new creation put into the most recent Knight Codex. It just seems unlikely that Games Workshop would specifically design a name and rough feel for a knight that was never ever going to come out, and I do genuinely think that this one is a taster of something to come in a future edition. As it's just referred to as an aside, it's not like we get much details of it, though for only having half a sentence worth of details for it, it actually tells us a surprising amount. They describe the Trycholus class knight as walking siege engines of the bullish Trycholus class, and that did seem like that could be one of the other major ways that they could go with knight designs if they wanted to dream up something new. I feel like we've seen that used as a trope for a few armies already. Perhaps things like the Ironclad Dreadnought being an up-armoured and close-range dreadnought for destroying enemy heavy armour and fortifications, or perhaps the differentiation of a Vindicator tank versus a Predator tank, or very armoured with a siege shield and packing a massive gun to crack through the absolute toughest of fortifications. If it goes down these same sort of tropes as those, it's likely to maybe be a bit more slow moving than the average Imperial Knight, maybe going 8 inches similar to the Dominus by this edition's rule sets, slightly more heavily armoured in some way. I feel like typically with siege style things, Games Workshops balance immense power with them having shorter range than normal. For example, the Demolisher Cannon only having a 24-inch range. Describing it as bullish is interesting enough as well, implying something that's big, lumbering and powerful, and also maybe capable of a devastating charge. Finally, its place in the list also gives us a few interesting things as well. They describe the Cerastus as tall and swift, and the Acastus to approach the legendary titans in size, so I guess it's not going to be on the same sort of scale as the Acastus style knight, and probably more similar to a Questoris in terms of overall size and weights. Finally, it's also listed as a lesser known class of knight, which feels appropriate enough given that we've never heard about it before. It could maybe be a little bit concerning for 40k release purposes that it's listed alongside the Acastus and Cerastus. Both of those are Forge World or Imperial Armour style knights that seem to have their main focus of their release being towards the Horus Heresy. But if it really was a knight that was aimed towards the Horus Heresy, it seems kind of unlikely that it would turn up first referenced in a Warhammer 40k codex as opposed to, say, a Heresy era Liber book. It still could mean that it's meant for that setting if it's listed alongside those ones, or maybe it's just understandably rare because they haven't released it or mentioned it ever before, so saying it was some sort of common class of knight would seem a bit unlikely. I was wondering whether or not the Trycholus name might give anything away. There's a couple of insects and beetles that have a similar sort of name. There's a Trycholus genus of snail. I've genuinely got no idea if that's what they're going for, though I feel like that could be a reasonable enough association if it's really heavily armoured and has some sort of great big tough carapace. In discussions on Reddit and places, I'd seen people sharing some previous concept art around. These ones were done by Forge World in 2014 when they had an open day, trying to design some new classes of Imperial Knights. I believe that these ones were shown alongside things that went on to be the Lancer. There do seem like there's quite a lot of ones that have really quite big extended and armoured carapaces that feel like they could fit for a Siege Knight. Perhaps it would be fun if we wind up getting one of these. That's another example of Games Workshop drawing on some past designs. I also saw a couple of people referencing the old epic style Knight Warden as well, which had quite a different role to the current Warden with its Gatling cannon in 40k. This one seems to have been more of a Siege Knight with one great big enormous gun. I guess that would also be quite a different flavour of Knight if you had a great big carapace mounted weapon as opposed to the more normal arm mounted ones. Interestingly enough though, the Trycholus class doesn't seem to have been the only knight mentioned in somewhat recent publications. It seems that in the Horus Heresy ones there's been repeated mentions of a knight Achaeus. Seems like there's just two different mentions, and if anything even less information than the Trycholus class. It seems that one of them is mentioned in an aside in a Forge World book called Inferno for 2017. This was one of the later ones that they had prior to the big reset for the second edition of Horus Heresy, and basically mentioned that chassis as a pattern of relic knights brought to war by a house Malanax who was using a bunch of their oldest relic knights, including Cerastus and Acastus patterns. Far more recently, and again from 2025, it looks like it's cropped up in the Liber Questoris as well. I saw this picture that people have been sharing around, listed under an auxiliary knight banner alongside the Acastus there. So it does look like it's a concept that Games Workshop still keeping on the back burner, even if there's no saying that it might get released anytime soon. Unlike the Trycholus one, there's quite a specific description of this role, we really have no idea about this. Achaeus is the name of an ancient Greek general, and also means griever apparently, but could just be being used as a cool name. Overall certainly doesn't necessarily imply they're going to come out anytime soon, but could certainly be a possibility for release for the Horus Heresy at some point. Though given that they've got the job of redoing all the resin knights so far, it might be quite a long time out. Even if it did turn up for the Horus Heresy, they seem to be very keen to keep their settings absolutely as separate as possible these days. I feel like the prospect of it getting rules for Warhammer 40k might be a little bit unlikely. It depends whether or not they really choose to keep on treating knights and custodians very differently, and have them as a sort of merged range between their two settings. For the name, it's also the name of a region in Greece. It does sound kind of similar to the Castellax Achaea that the Thousand Sons used, these ones being psychically attuned automata, though it is spelt a little bit differently here. If they wanted to go for a Psycho Knight though, it's definitely one that they have in the roster. So far we've only seen the Chaos Abominant with psychic powers. In any case, I found it pretty interesting that there's not one but two different knight classes that have been teased in the lore, and both of those in publications within 2025 as well. It seems that they've redone the majority of the epic scale knights in one form or another. One of the few that they seem not to have done is the Knight Baron. This was one that was armed with a power lance and battle cannon, I believe, so I guess that could well be another option for a name that they could recycle if they wanted a different variant of a Dominus or Questoris perhaps, though whether or not it necessarily have the exact same equipment, who really knows. Outside of hints and teasers, there's plenty of wishlist things that Knight players might want. I still say at the very top of it for me will be to actually include the Forge World and Imperial Armor Knights fully in the Codex, or at least for the plastic ones they've released. There's really no real reason they couldn't make the Cerastus a fair bit more mainstream. It's often speculated that they only keep the Horus Heresy and 40k separate for their sales figures between different settings and interdepartmental competition. That might or might not be true, but seems like a logical reason they might choose to not do a fairly obvious decision to increase sales of a model. Otherwise, for common ways that they could expand, maybe giving the armigers more flexible loadouts like the Chaos War Dogs, perhaps a Gatling cannon option or a lance and shield. They could do something that's more mobile, like a jump armiger perhaps, or some sort of punchy fortress destroying melee dominus, though that one feels a bit less likely given it's a sort of gun turret knight really. Otherwise, you could certainly do an Imperial Psi Knight, like the equivalent to the Abominant. A Siege Knight seemed already a possibility on the cards, and I guess if those teasers are true, it seems like the most likely. And maybe for Chaos Knight specifically, having a named character and a dedicated Chaos Knight Tyrant kit would both be on the agenda, though I do kind of wonder if they'll ever bother to make a Chaos Knight Tyrant, when they could just make an entire different variant that people don't already have in their collections. Otherwise, people often float around the idea of some sort of non-knight support with men-at-arms of some kind. I think the nearest tease that we got to those were these ones pictured alongside some Chaos Knights in some official Codex art. They do look pretty excellent as sort of feudal world knight cultists perhaps, some great big shields and some disturbing technology going on there. It might be something to save the reliance on allied demons or Imperial agents, maybe. In any case though, let me know what you make of the teasers. What would your hopes be for a Trycholus Siege Knight? And what do you think that Achaeus pattern could represent for the Horus Heresy if we ever get it? I look forward to hearing your takes down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new videos out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel and you'd like to help support and keep them coming, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.